Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Huge developments this afternoon as to what is going on behind the scenes at Red Bull. Just after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix this year, we saw Gianpiero Lambiase, Max Verstappen's race engineer, visibly emotional, and rumours started to emerge immediately afterwards. His partnership with Max may be done and he would move into a different role for personal reasons behind the scenes at Red Bull Racing. But a new opportunity, it appears, has emerged. Aston Martin are looking to swoop in, giving Lambiase the opportunity to join them on a serious salary in a seriously senior position. There is no doubt what Lawrence Stroll's endgame is here, and he might well be getting his wish if this continues over the next couple of years. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, I greatly appreciate it. I hope you all had a fantastic day yesterday. Let's dive right in, because these are the three test dates. We've known them for some time, but just in one precise graphic. It's actually a month today in January that they will turn up to Barcelona for the first behind closed doors test, then two public tests in Bahrain as we see these cars hit the track with questionable engines in some of them. So if you guys have been living under a rock for the last week, you may not have heard about this Mercedes engine drama, but effectively there are compression ratio limits next year which are tested at ambient temperatures. It appears that Mercedes may have found a way to increase that slightly when they're actually running on track, rather than when they're cold, when they're getting tested. Apparently, the Mercedes team have spoken with the FIA about this for quite a long time, and the FIA were like, look, these are the rules, it's measured in this way. If you can find a loophole around the rule, you're welcome to do that. Now look, whether the FIA should have done that, whether the FIA should have shut this down, that is a very good question, but it is one where the answer was inevitable. According to the latest rumour, the FIA effectively has no problem with this. They've worked with Mercedes, maybe worked with is the wrong way to put it, but as I said the other day, this feels like such an obvious trick and loophole that I'm surprised that other teams didn't at least ask for clarification on it. Apparently Mercedes did a long while ago, and the FIA said, look, this is how we are going to test the compression ratio. If it passes the test, that's okay. And they had the conversation. Mercedes therefore pursued their direction, and now this is being talked about by everyone. The FIA can't exactly go back and say, well, sorry, Mercedes, I know that we told you a year ago this was fine and you've worked on it for the last year. Now we're going to ban it and you're not going to be able to race in Australia. That's just not going to be happening. Again, lots of debate on whether this is similar to what we think Ferrari were up to back in 2019, where they were tricking the fuel flow sensor to boost the engine effectively. Look, to me, that is different, just because whatever you think about the FIA's decision to be kind of on board with allowing Mercedes to do this and to exploit the loophole, Mercedes have done what is within the rules, what is allowed by the regulations and by the regulators. What Ferrari were doing was not allowed by the FIA. There was no conversation there, at least initially with the FIA, to say, okay, I know there's a line here that says there is a maximum of 100 kilograms of fuel flow per race or whatever, but we're actually going above that because we've tricked your sensor. To me, that is more cheating than what Mercedes are doing here. But again, I can see a debate on both sides of this. The bottom line is that it seems that Red Bull might have been involved in this whole drama as well. They will also get to do it. Now, again, this may change. They may decide that for 2027, you're no longer allowed to do this. But again, how do you stop it? How do you check? It appears the FIA don't really know. And as a result, they're like, well, I guess it's fine as it stands. But the teams will find themselves in an interesting spot, especially if Mercedes, and they have 4 teams, Red Bull have 2 teams. If they are ahead of the curve next season and they have the 10, 13 horsepower advantage we think that they might, that could be at least a couple of tenths per lap just on the power unit, with other benefits as well for energy recharge and all that other stuff. But if there is a 2% or greater deficit between engine manufacturers after Miami next year, so the 6th race, that's when there is a period that kicks in which allows the teams to upgrade their engine. So if you're more than 2% behind, and that will be measured, I guess, on a dyno or whatever it is, they have versions of the engine that the FIA can use to compare, basically, between what is a set standard engine the PU manufacturers made and what's actually in the car. But if there's more of a delta there than 2%, the FIA will allow those teams to upgrade their engine to then re-homologate the PU. If it's more than 4% behind, they then get more dyno time, more budget, more upgrades, whatever. So, the intention of this is to prevent what happened in 2014, and it may be successful in doing so. But if it is, Mercedes probably still win next year, or McLaren, or maybe Red Bull, who knows, right? It may be that a team with this advantage does win the championship, and it doesn't seem like Ferrari are especially confident that is going to be them. Fred Vasseur even says another point is that next year the first picture of the season won't be important, the Australia classification won't be important, what will be important is development and the ability to develop quickly. I think he is actually kind of right about this to an extent. But equally, if Mercedes win in Australia by 25 seconds, that's probably quite important for how the season is going to play out. And look, 24 races is a long time. But if I'm Lewis Hamilton, if I'm Charles Leclerc, if I'm a Ferrari fan and I'm hearing my team principal say, well, don't worry about Australia, it's not relevant for the season. It's like, well, you can't have a point. The development curve will be immense. Dealing with the inevitable problems these cars have will be a massive challenge. Dealing with the reliability headaches, which surely will be there, will be another big predicament for the teams. So Vasseur's not wrong. But equally, it's different to usual because typically Ferrari are saying, yeah, we're going to come out of the gates hard, right? Whereas that's not really what they're talking about here. Is George Russell the favourite if Mercedes have the best car? Yes. Is George Russell the favourite if Mercedes only have the best engine? That is a different conversation. The bookies, it seems, still have Max Verstappen as season favourite because he's Max, right? And what else do you do? There's too many other question marks. The only certainty is Verstappen, I suppose. That's their argument. But look, Norris, Piastri, you'd expect him to get a better again next year. I think it would be a surprise if Piastri doesn't take another at least significant, maybe small step forward. He's improved every year so far. But again, next year, the cars are very different. Who knows how that goes? Maybe Norris likes the car again at McLaren. He didn't really like last year's car too much compared to what his style prefers and what was happening in previous years. Also, I think it's plausible that Norris improves again significantly because now the pressure's off his back and he made significant strides from 24 to 25 anyway. So, like Russell says, I'm not here to finish second, basically. So next year will be a huge year for him, and we can certainly expect this number to be jumping up quite significantly, which is the race put together the deficit of the slowest car to the fastest, and it was relatively low in 2025, actually the lowest that it's ever been. 2009 came very close, but yeah, 2025 was the closest the field has ever looked. That will almost certainly not be the case next year. Let's talk about where Red Bull fit into this whole conversation, and of course the big one, further changes happening behind the scenes. Mattia Binotto says that Audi, no faith. Well, not no faith, but no confidence. They are certainly not doing a typical hopium Ferrari strategy where Binotto says, Audi do not even intend to be a surprise. Not only will we not be a surprise package, we don't even intend to be. So, we can expect that Audi probably aren't going to be that competitive next year. But how about Red Bull Racing, right? Because they've got their new engine project. They've been a force in the Horner era since the Vettel days, then the Verstappen days. But look at this picture, right? Does it not feel like quite a long time ago? Horner's now gone for some time. Marco's now officially gone as well. He was sacked as a director of Red Bull Racing on, I think, the 19th of December. That's now been made official. So, yeah, it's been a week since both of these guys are no longer part of Red Bull in any respect. We've had a lot of key departures. Adrian Newey was a massive one. Jonathan Wheatley, another key important figure. Also, Will Courtenay, top strategy guy. He's also at the door to McLaren as well. Even Rob Marshall, one of their absolute chief designers. He also left to McLaren a couple of years ago. We know where that ended, right? For McLaren's side anyway. So, another key figure of this Verstappen era is Gianpiero Lambiase. Of course, Max Verstappen is also a key figure of that era, and he's still there for the time being. This is Helmut Marko, this is GP, and we saw at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Max came on the radio and said, look, GP, we showed them one final time, who's the boss really? And there was rumours that GP was missing races earlier in the season due to personal issues at home. even though those issues did not disappear, he decided to come to Qatar, to come to Abu Dhabi and be there at the end of the season when he might not necessarily needed to have been, just to give Max all the support that he could have. And it was remarkable to see GP so visibly emotional at the end of this Grand Prix, and there was lots of talk as to why. The initial implication was, okay, GP may no longer be Verstappen's race engineer next season. Due to what's happening in his personal life, he may go to a more hybrid role where he stays at home more often, he's away from the track. Effectively a promotion, right? But you often see this when, people like Peter Boddington, he's still on the pit wall with Kimi, but, he doesn't have to be if he doesn't want to, right? Yes, he was Lewis Hamilton's race engineer for a long time. If he wanted to go and effectively take a promotion to a more senior position, he could probably absolutely do that. But that's what he wants to do. And I'm sure that GP wants to do this for Max, but maybe he receives an offer that he cannot refuse. So things have changed here, right? It seemed to be a plausible option, and this is the article that John Noble puts here together for the race today, and he talks a little bit about that dynamic at the end of Abu Dhabi, the rumours about the talk that he may potentially move into a different relationship at Red Bull. But knowing the way that Lawrence Stroll operates, seeing all this play out, he thinks, well, actually, Giampiero, I've got a good offer for you. How about you come over to Aston Martin? You get to stay around Silverstone, right? Stay in the UK, take a massive paycheck, give you whatever you need to manage things at home, whatever's being a significant challenge in recent times, and you can take a very senior position, right? So high-level sources have revealed to the race that another possibility has opened up. According to insiders, talks have taken place between Lambiase and Aston Martin about a senior position at the Silverstone-based squad. While nothing has been agreed, it is understood that Aston Martin has discussed with Lambiase the possibility of a management position there, potentially at team principal or CEO level, as part of a revamped structure. Now, as we know, Adrian Newey has recently been announced as the new team principal of Aston Martin, but as Newey said in Qatar when he was queried on it, nothing's going to change for him, is pretty much what he said. He understands that given that Andy Cowell is better positioned on the engine side and managing that relationship with Honda, and they didn't necessarily share the same vision as to what the team needed overall, Newey said, well, it's better off for me to effectively be team principal because I make all the decisions, but I'm not really going to be out here on the track talking to the sponsors, doing all the interviews. That's not where Newey wants to be, and it's not where he is best placed. He's best placed in the drawing room with his pen and paper, or pencil and canvas, as it seems to be for Newey. So he even himself said nothing's really going to change, which opened the door to the fact that it is quite likely that Aston Martin at some point appoint a CEO, in the same way that at McLaren there's Andrea Stella, who is quite public facing as we know, but he is fundamentally an engineer by trade. Zach Brown takes a lot of the limelight. He deals with loads of the CEO level responsibilities, talking often to the media, dealing with sponsors, all of that related stuff. That's kind of Zach Brown's job. Andrea Stella is still very public, but not to the same extent that a Toto Wolff might be necessarily at Mercedes. So ever since Adrian Newey was announced as team principal, he was not announced as team principal and CEO, which raised serious questions as to whether, let's say, Christian Horner could come to Aston Martin as CEO. Newey would apparently be open to that happening. Actually, they go on to talk about what Newey said at the Qatar Grand Prix earlier this season, but we know the dynamic there with Horner was stretched, with Newey at the very least. There was a recent theory that actually they would be willing to work together again, but is that what Lawrence Stroll wants to do, given that, let's be honest, why would we give Lambiase this opportunity? Well, it's to try to get Max Verstappen, right? This is the end goal for Aston Martin. And it's a goal that, well, Lawrence Stroll is giving his absolute best shot to make happen. And I think you've got to commend it, right? Like, these teams are very wealthy nowadays. The valuations of these teams have gone up dramatically in recent years. As a result, the teams have the resources, if they want to try and make big things happen. And that's absolutely what Aston Martin are doing, becoming effectively the works Honda team, giving Adrian Newey a massive bag and equity to come on board as their managing technical partner and now team principal. clearly there is an intention from Lawrence Stroll to bring back together the old gang at Red Bull Racing and have them as part of Aston Martin. Now, Horner is a controversial character. Max Verstappen, certainly Jos Verstappen, not the biggest fans. But let's say Gianpiero Lambiase, fantastic relationship there with Max for a long time. In the same way that when Hamilton left to Ferrari, there was lots of talk as to, is Bono going to go as well? Are they going to be able to get him? But due to gardening leave and these other things, that was not really possible. But maybe for Aston Martin, there's a way to make this work. You know, it's not that long ago that Horner was paid off $100 million, and yet it's only in the start of next year where he's able to return. So, look, GP may not be able to get this role immediately, but it's very plausible that it happens at some point in the next 6 to 8, 12 months anyway, and that could be perfect timing for the 2027 target that is Max Verstappen. He's going to be there in 2026, but if Red Bull don't deliver next year, and if Aston Martin and Honda are showing some promise, and if GP becomes their new CEO or something, then an Adrian Newey's designing the cars, it's like, well, how many more pull factors would you like? And also, if GP was to leave Red Bull, that massively changes the dynamic at Red Bull, right? Things already must feel, they feel different from the outside. They must feel massively different to the inside to Max. A number of his mechanics have left. They've been paid more money elsewhere. A number of engineers have departed. As I say, the big names, the Neweys, the Horners, the Marcos, the Courtenay's, the Marshalls, and now potentially the GPs of this world as well, all out the door, some to McLaren, some of which to Aston Martin. So we know that Red Bull are going through a widespread change, but this is a big one because the big rumour was that, okay, Lambiase may no longer be Max's race engineer, but he will at least still be part of Red Bull, right? That relationship will be maintained. But if Lambiase gets an offer that he can't refuse, then, you know, for 2027, Max will absolutely be having the conversation, right? So this, I think, is the end game. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. It's also worth mentioning before we close out, he's not the only driver that Aston Martin will be thinking about. Of course, Max would be their target, but there is a big rumour about potentially Charles Leclerc. It's widely expected that he will be a figure in the market if Ferrari don't deliver. But I will just share some comments before we close out here from Arturo Mazzario, former Ferrari driver, controversial character. He said a few interesting things in recent months. But this is what he said the other day to the Italian press. And you've got to wonder whether this is just him saying this or whether there's actually an agenda in play. If Enzo Ferrari was still around, he wouldn't have even, this is talking about Charles Leclerc, by the way, the absolute prince of the Tifosi, he wouldn't have even made it through the gates of Maranello. Leclerc ended up occupying a seat at Ferrari that at the time he simply didn't deserve. He's a very good driver, like many others. If you put a bunch of names in a hat and pick one out, they're all the same. He's not special. Boasting about being ahead of a 7-time world champion like Hamilton makes little sense. In reality, Lewis took his foot off the gas because he doesn't feel integrated in the team. Why would he give 110% in those circumstances? If Enzo was still around, he wouldn't have even made it through the gates of Maranello. I'm certain of that. He wouldn't have even been welcomed as a customer, which is, I thought, was a remarkable statement from a former Ferrari driver, and in many respects, like a kind of a Ferrari legend, given, you know, the Niki Lauda story, right? So, yeah, it really is remarkable. And again, this caused a lot of controversy as to whether there's something going on here, right? Like, there's Charles Leclerc's not happy at Ferrari. There's rumours that he's considering his options elsewhere. Now you get former Ferrari guy talking to the press, the Italian press, and, you know, what some might argue is a character assassination. Is this a prelude of what might be to come in coming months? But it does kind of feel like the Ferrari way. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. This is Fernando Alonso, by the way. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.